In a collective way of speaking, when most of us think of local legends, the first few images that enter our mind are usually one of three things: extraterrestrial, Bigfoot, or other cryptid. Every state in the US is home to each one, but somewhere in between, a rather peculiar mystery gets a unique spot because it's simply incomparable to the others. In today's case, we mean there's a more human element to what would usually be reserved for the paranormal. Allegan County, Michigan. A 1920s-era mansion sits along the shore of Lake Michigan, historically recognized as the Felt Mansion. Located at 6597 138th Avenue in Saugatuck, it sits atop a 15-acre plot of land surrounded by gorgeous gardens and woodlands. Originally built as a summer home, it now serves as an all-purpose destination for tourists, providing guided tours, hosting celebrations, and even serving as a wedding venue. But while visitors soak in the sights, a very different kind of history is shared amongst locals, one that exists just beyond the trees. And for decades now, people have sworn that something other than the wildlife was keeping an eye on them. If anything, the legend of the Michigan Melon Heads personifies the horrors of mental asylum living in the previous century. Conditions and treatments so unspeakable that even exploring the husk of a building elicits feelings of dread. Given the nature of this agonizing existence that so many lived before, it leaves the collective to imagine the nightmares baked within its walls. But out of all the asylum tales told, true or false, the Michigan Melon Heads take on a much different, much more imaginative story. The most popular version you'll hear begins and ends in Holland, Michigan, sometime in the 1970s. Behind the walls of some unnamed insane asylum, a group of children suffering from hydrocephalus were placed under the supervision of doctors who, like many at that time, subjected their patients to abhorrent treatment. Hydrocephalus is a condition most common amongst infants that causes fluid buildup within the brain, resulting in an enlarged cranium. In the 19th and through much of the 20th century, this condition did warrant admission to asylums, as society deemed children with this condition mentally unfit and in need of treatment. This led to yet another group of people to undergo symptomatic treatments that likely left them worse off than they came in. In the case of the Holland Asylum, the afflicted children dealt with much, much worse. It's implied that the young patients went through a torturous series of experiments throughout their time at the facility, forced to endure whatever maddening thing their twisted doctors told them to do, leaving them scarred and disfigured. Another version of the story even puts the hydrocephalus factor aside, simply stating that it was the experiments themselves that made the children's heads abnormally shaped. Whatever the case, the Michigan Asylum was responsible for the trauma of an unnamed number of young people, whose experiences burned a permanent mark on their psyche. Then, for reasons unknown, perhaps a lack of funding, the asylum finally shut down, putting an end to the constant torture, but not to the struggle. Now left to their own fate, the kids fled from their house of horrors and into the nearby woods to live on their own, brothers and sisters, bonded by the unspeakable. Then comes the account of the hermit. Some people will tell you that after the escape, the horrified children found themselves in the care of an old man who lived off the grid, taking them in for a time. However, the version of this story claims that this man is who was responsible for their outward appearance, not the condition they were committed for. Supposedly, the hermit was no better than the quack doctors who subjected them to such harsh conditions, causing them a harm so great it left their heads so disfigured. In this case, the kids had enough. One day, they ganged up on the hermit and killed him, escaping into the forest once more, just on their own. Unsupervised and forced to be self-reliant, the children soon went feral, considering they weren't already, devolving into nothing short of rabid animals who spent their time rummaging for food and attacking anyone unfortunate enough to stray too close. Ever since then, rumors began to spread amongst locals who ventured near Felt Mansion. Ominous signs from beyond the tree line, strange footsteps, disembodied voices, an uncanny feeling of being watched. And sometimes, the source of those clues made themselves known from time to time. Sometimes, staring right back at you, stood a short, disturbing form with an unusually bulbous head. One of the lesser-known origin stories comes from the theory that the beings weren't exactly institutionalized children, but simply average people that were harmed by the dangerous effects of radiation from the Cook nuclear plant located in Bridgman. Apparently, residents in the nearby area absorbed so much radioactive material that they literally began to mutate. The most noticeable feature being their rapidly growing heads. Fearing societal pressures, the afflicted people left their normal lives, trading them for a life of obscurity in the adjacent wilderness, where much of what happened in the other tales came to be. Feral, wild men who seemed detached from reality, keeping to themselves for the most part, but acting openly hostile to outside parties. Whatever the true story, word spread of these oddly specific encounters, attracting thrill seekers far and wide to try their luck at witnessing what locals called the Melon Heads. By the 2000s, it had already solidified itself as a popular urban legend. And what urban legend is complete without a good headlight method? Teenagers in search of a thrill practice the tradition of parking their car out that way and flashing the lights, hoping to see one of the beings. Surprisingly, the Michigan Melonhead story only serves as one of 3 similar tales told across the country. In both Ohio and Connecticut, there are nearly identical creatures that stalk the woods. In Kirtland, Lake County, Ohio, there once was an orphanage headed by one Dr. Crow. He also took in children suffering from hydrocephalus, and, like the Michigan story, performed awful experiments on them. Dr. Crow, the mad doctor or scientist he was, injected his victims with unknown substances that apparently worsened the fluid buildup, some saying that this was all an effort to create a type of superhuman. Either way, a heart-wrenching thought. The Ohio children didn't wait for their facility to shut down, however. Fed up and banding together, Dr. Crow didn't stand a chance when they ganged up on him, ending the madman's life and going the extra mile to burn down the entire orphanage. They scattered themselves through the woods, and the rest was history. Although unlike their brethren in Michigan, these poor souls aren't known for being reserved and skittish, but rather territorial and openly hostile. To the unfortunate traveler in Kirtland, the long wooded stretch of Wisner Road serves as the main hotspot for these disturbing creatures. Wisner Road can evoke feelings of paranoia, like you're being watched. Unusually humanoid silhouettes glimpse as you pass. You might hear a strange noise or two, but at its absolute worst, the old test subjects may just emerge when you least expect it, dealing with you no differently than they did Dr. Crow. As for the Connecticut version of the story, the legend takes on a similar premise, but with a completely different series of events that followed. In the fall of 1960, in southwestern Connecticut, another unnamed insane asylum happened to burn down, although it's unspecified whether or not it was intentional. This time, the patients who escaped weren't a collection of children suffering from hydrocephalus, but simply regular patients who took the disaster's opportunity to run. With the asylum now left a smoldering ruin, the escapees took to the forest, same as the previous stories. But it's here where the chilling twist takes place. Directionless and ill-equipped to find more conventional means to survive, The patients resorted to cannibalism to stay fed. The true starting point of their menacing reputation, where the Melonheads came into play, is also quite unsettling, because the Melonheads weren't the asylum patients, but their inbred offspring. The enlarged heads are a feature from generations of this. Today, supposed sightings of these descendants are reported in places like southern Litchfield County, Fairfield County, and western New Haven County. Some local hikers and campers will tell you they've been stalked by these beings while out in the brush, peeking behind bushes and darting through trees. Even fewer will tell you they've actually been attacked by them for unknowingly trespassing on their territory. With that, we go back to Michigan. The Melonheads of Michigan are actually just one of many unexplained phenomena surrounding the Felt Mansion. The structure itself has been the subject of its own share of hauntings for some time now. The mansion serves as a centerpiece for the Melonhead tale. But those aren't the only entities inhabiting its walls. Felt Mansion was originally constructed as a summer home for Dorr E. Felt, an inventor from Chicago, and his wife, Agnes, in 1928. Unfortunately, only 6 weeks after the mansion was built, Agnes passed away, never truly experiencing her home away from home. Her ghostly apparition supposedly haunts the building to this day, walking the hollowed halls that she didn't get to enjoy whilst living. Signs of Agnes continue to make themselves known to visitors and ghost hunters. Cold spots and footsteps are something to be expected, but some claim Agnes herself makes more physical manifestations here and there. She drifts up and down the staircase and out of the corner of people's eyes. Even more conveniently, she's often spotted in her own personal bedroom. In fact, there's a prominent incident involving a ghost hunter named Merle, associated with the West Michigan Ghost Hunters Society, having a close encounter with Agnes. The group had just finished a ghost tour and spent some time cleaning their equipment, where team member Merle spent his time doing so in Agnes's upstairs room. Thanks to a video camera set up by Jason Bouchard, this was able to be captured. As you can see, the video begins with double doors already showing signs of activity on their own. It's important to note that the windows inside were painted shut, restricting any outdoor airflow. We can hear other team members downstairs having a conversation for a moment. Then, in an instant, the doors fly open as if hit by a gust of wind, sending Merle running. According to Merle himself, he felt a blast of cold air from no particular source, which is what pushed the doors open. Reason being, Merle had said something inappropriate while in the room, and Agnes didn't like such foul language. And although the ghost of Agnes Felt herself lingering around would make perfect sense, others have claimed to see much more than that. In the darker corners of the abode, shadow beings are rumored to linger, darting from sight when pursued. Doors open, things move, the energy uneven. Some have even said unidentified figures watch visitors through the upper windows, with curtains moving and adjusting themselves. In regards to the infamous Melonheads of Michigan, though, there's a much more direct, much more straightforward explanation for their existence, rather than the Frankenstein-esque origin story that seemed to carry on as the most popular. The Melonheads were real, but not in the way you think. You see, after the death of Dorr Felt, the Felt Mansion was later sold and converted into St. Augustine Seminary School for Boys in 1949. And like many private schools, local children who attended public schools carried a very pessimistic view of peers who they perceived as upper class or stuffy, hence giving them the name Melonheads, similar to the popular nickname Egghead. Despite its status as simply an urban legend, we wanted to seek out stories from Michiganders who are familiar with this disturbing story and what they think about it. The following 3 submissions come from an article on MysteriousMichigan.com, originally published on Halloween 2007. The first one reads, "Last year, me and some of my friends from Hope College decided we wanted to go to Allegan County Woods in Hamilton in search of the Melonheads. On our first night there, we went back on a path for about a mile and came to an opening where there seemed to be a foundation of a building still there, but the building was gone. On the walk back to the opening, there was a sign hanging over the path, but it was too faded to make out the wording. On the very first night, we did not expect anything too out of the ordinary that we didn't think we couldn't explain by animals or other sorts. We went back the next night and it was raining mixed with some lightning. Me and two other guys were leading the group down the path, and about half a mile into our walk, there was a lightning flash, and all three of us saw the exact same figure of a human about 4.5 feet tall, with an abnormally large head, standing in the middle of the clearing that we had gone to the night before. We three kind of slowed down for a minute, and the next thing we knew, we heard a huge crash in the woods to the left of us. We immediately turned and ran back to the cars." The next one reads, "This legend has made its way to my neck of the woods too. A little different though. In southwest Michigan, the Melonheads are said to be located behind the Cook nuclear plant in Bridgman. There are two different stories of how they got to be there. The first story says there was an insane asylum in the woods before the power plant was built, and there was a fire that burned the asylum to the ground, and the Melonheads escaped and have been living in the world ever since. The other story says that there was a group of people who lived behind the plant in the woods. After exposure to the radiation, they began to have swelling of the brain, and out of embarrassment and shame, they stayed in the woods to be left alone by the public to live their lives. The nuclear plant and all surrounding property have been closed off to the public since the 9/11 attacks, but you used to be able to drive back into the woods and explore. It was a big pastime for teenagers to scare the bejesus out of themselves and their dates. I have been told that the whole area back there is like a maze, and unless you know the area well, it is very easy to get lost in. I suppose that just adds to the scare factor. So I would say that the Melonheads from my area are just an urban legend, but it always makes for interesting conversation, especially when talking with those who have been there and claim to have seen one." The final submission reads, "I have friends who have seen the Melonheads in the woods a few times. Do I believe them? Yes and no. They say if you flick your car headlights, you're more prone to seeing something, but I'm too afraid to try. I have heard insane ghost stories about the Felt Mansion though. People seeing kids playing at the top of the stairs and then jumping off the balcony of the house. There was also a story about teens who were going to vandalize the Felt Mansion before the restoration began in 2000. It was in the middle of the night that a man in a horse-drawn carriage pulled up and asked them if they needed a ride. They freaked out and ran away." In the end, the takeaway seems to just be a big resounding question mark when it comes to the unusual activity in and around the Felt Mansion area. Although some have come to the conclusion that the Melonheads are a real possibility, there seems to be a myriad of spectacles residing in both the mansion and the woods. With that being said, we can easily rule out the asylum story as it's obviously untrue. No records exist of such a facility, nor has Felt Mansion served as one in the past. It's a placeholder for the story, and nothing more. Does that mean people haven't seen unidentified creatures with bulbous heads though? Is it that hard to believe that these so-called Melonheads are just one of many paranormal phenomena in the region? Or is there some truth to it? That a band of forgotten children made the wilderness their home, cutting off ties to society and becoming no less wild than a pack of wolves. It's quite the convoluted urban legend, and even though its origins are based in fiction, it highlights just how horrific and cruel life in an old asylum could be, no matter the age. It's a story of well overdue revenge and a chance at true freedom, just without the modern amenities. Either way, to these afflicted children, anything was better than the life they once lived. So for generations now, they and their offspring have stayed hidden in Holland and Saugatuck State Park, keeping to themselves, living primitive nomadic lifestyles. But for the unwary wanderer, you could very well be treading on land long since claimed by them, meaning that off in the distance, just beyond the tree line, a small figure with a large cranium could be staring right back at you.